Once you've truly looked into the abyss, you get a fit of the giggles. Our family was a very unhappy, dysfunctional family. I have to hasten to state that, life didn't change just when my father died. It changed as soon as I was born. It was always going to be odd. My mum and dad pretty much hated each other and let the family know about it too in no uncertain manner. So that kind of thing is always in progress. You're never really sure where that's going to take you mentally. As David Tibet said to me years and years ago, I think it was when I was living with him in 1986, and we were very, very close. And he said to me that this art has probably saved you. If you were doing just what would be seen as a normal 9-to-5 job, you probably would have some real psychological problems. I was born in 1956 in a southern suburb of London, in what would be, I suppose, described in America as a white working class ghetto. It's a council estate in the UK. My father was a career RAF, Royal Air Force guy, who after leaving after the war, he'd been in the service before the war, joined what became BOAC, which is now British Airways. So he was always involved in aeronautics. But then, I suppose in his late 40s, my age now, he suffered the first of his heart attacks, which disabled him from work any further. And that was the case until he died of his third heart attack when he was 56. So he grew up fairly poor. He died a week after my 14th birthday. I'm one of 4. I have a younger sister and an older brother and an older stepsister. My father's first wife was killed by a V-2 rocket during the Blitz of London. That's the beginning of where I am. I grew up in that environment. It was a very militaristic environment. My brother did go on to join the RAF himself, the Royal Air Force. I was destined for that. At the age of 18, I took off hitching around Europe for several months, dropped lots and lots of acid, and came back a changed individual. Most of my friends up until the age of 11 were locals, but I was one of 3 people that gained what they called the 11 plus, which was an examination before you went to senior school or high school, that got me out of the estate. So it was only me and 2 other people managed to get to a better school rather than the estate school. So most of my friends then became outside the area, and it was a dangerous area. So the new friends I went on to make at the new school, their parents really didn't even like letting their children come and visit me. So that was the situation. There was a gang going around with arms, sawing off shotguns, baseball bats, Land Rovers. If you didn't fit in, you were beaten up badly. Your family were terrorized. A lot of the area was based on crime as well, which I later got into or involved in petty crime. It was a way of existing and surviving. During my early years at school, which I loathed, my infant and junior school days up until the age of 11, I'd run away 2 or 3 times, and I had learning difficulties. I eventually had to have special learning lessons to read, which I didn't manage until I was about 9. And from there on I took off. I skipped the Janet and John type of books. I went straight to the encyclopedias and history books, and that's what I was fascinated with. Certainly I'm not sitting down thinking about what a miserable 5-year-old I was, but it must come out somewhere, because that 5-year-old is living in a 48-year-old man's body these days, and those experiences I experienced today and tomorrow and yesterday are all coloured by what that 5-year-old was experiencing. I realise that probably more and more as I get older, and I've always been self-analytical, but I've become more so of late. It's possibly just a period I'm going through for a variety of reasons. I had bronze aircraft of Spitfires that my dad had modelled whilst he was rehabilitating in hospital during those years. So it was really destined that we were probably going to join the RAF, his sons, which my brother did, disastrously so. It's not a good idea to try and follow in your father's footsteps at the best of times, and he wasn't really cut out for that. Whether or not, if my father had lived by the time I was 18, the pressure would have been on for me to have gone in, I don't know, but my dad died a week after my 14th birthday, and I was really sort of set on an independent course from there on. So you're surrounded by war memorabilia, and I had a natural attraction to a lot of it. But what perturbed my father was I had a natural attraction to the side he'd been fighting against, which up until the time I started buying my first bits of military memorabilia with my paper round money, so I'd be about 12, 13. He sort of conceded eventually. He freaked out with the first thing I bought, which was a Wehrmacht German Army summer issue tunic, which I kept hidden in the sort of shed at the bottom of the garden for some time until he found it and went crazy and insisted on me taking it back to the place I bought it from. But because my obsession or attraction to these things was so genuine, eventually he accompanied me up to Edgware Road in North London, which is filled with a lot of antique shops, and we found the oldest, rustiest, worst conditioned German helmet that could possibly be found. I think that the story was they just dug it out of a field in France only recently. Very poor condition, completely covered in rust, no inner, no paintwork at all. And he said, well, if you can refurbish that to usable condition, then I'll be convinced of your sort of keenness on the subject. So I did. It was a very nice piece. So I repainted it, got new decals to put on the side, and sort of put a new liner in, and then he died. So, but he was convinced by then I was obsessed with the subject matter. I mean, my brother's bedroom and mine the ceilings were covered in model aircraft, whilst my brother tended to have sort of the Spitfires and Hurricanes and Lancaster bombers. I tended to have the German side of things, and it evened itself out in the end. My dad sort of was reconciled to the fact I was slightly different from the rest of the family. I was the demon seed come to haunt him. My older brother, who's 10 years older than me, has long since disappeared off the map, and my older stepsister, who's 13 years older than me, the last time I saw her would have been in May 1970 at my father's funeral. When I was 30, it was the last time I saw her, and we'd never got on. We were like strangers even when the family was living together. So, and because of the traumatic sort of upbringing, where everyone seemed to hate each other and it was a question of survival until you could escape, I treaded with a great degree of trepidation towards meeting her again. But over the past few years, there have been a few letters saying, I'm getting older, I want to meet, and which can be seen as the sprat that catches the mackerel. But so I was dubious about such a rendezvous, but everything seemed to be pointing in the right position this time out when I visited the UK. So via my younger sister, we arranged a rendezvous. Equally, I hadn't seen my younger sister for 8 years, so we've all had disparate lives to fulfill and live. And it was like meeting a scary alien. You only know there's a connection because you've been told there's a connection. You know it from your past. But I'm very aware that the most important things are today and tomorrow, and the past was a long, long time ago, and it's left its legacy. And it wasn't as bad an experience as I thought it was going to be, probably because I've experienced such a lot since I was 30 that it's hardened me up. But it's completely the accident of birth, as far as I can relate to it, that I have zero link with this individual. He was shot down a couple of times and survived, and then was put onto sort of ground forces. I always remember looking at him in the bathroom when he was shaving one day, and you could notice only in the mirror with the reflection that his face was slightly crooked. And it was because it had been reconstructed after one of the crashes. Otherwise, you were just used to looking at him face on, and that's how Dad looked. He didn't look abnormal, but you could see that. And he'd had a hard war, as did my uncles, his brothers. They were all frontline troops in the army. He was the only one in the RAF. And he'd in fact been beaten up by his older brother because it had been a long Pierce tradition to join the artillery in the First World War and going back. So because he sort of dropped out of the tradition, he joined the RAF in 1936, years before the Second World War. He was taken into the garden, beaten up by Uncle George. I always remember that story.
Giddy giddy carousel, giddy giddy carousel, la 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 la.
I just had a natural call into history, art, what have you. In the late 50s, I was also very keenly attracted to music. There were a couple of shows on British television called the 6-5 Special, which was shown on 6:05 in the evening on Friday night, and Call for Cats. And I'd be intrigued by all the sort of early rock and roll stuff that was coming along then, and dance to it. I mean, that my parents were bemused and perplexed by the fact that I was obsessed by these things. One of my early recollections was a sort of odd rendition of Like a Rubber Ball, I'll Come Bouncing Back to You. And to this day, I remember the sort of studio setup of it, where these sort of girls were in these really groovy dresses, bouncing red rubber balls up against walls while the song was being played. It was the precursor to videos. You didn't get the real American stars on there. It was just dance troops dancing along to the latest American hit. And I was so disinterested in academia until later that the arts just had a natural calling. My father was nothing less than supportive to me, but not in a direct way. He didn't. It was just little words he would say, which would encourage that, as bizarre as my behaviour might have been, he thought it was bearable. I probably had left home before I'd even left home in reality. From about the age of 18, I was spending less and less time there, either hitching around Europe, as I said, or staying at friends' houses. When I came back from Europe after those 3 months in Amsterdam, the drug input was becoming such that my last trip in Amsterdam was a bad one that lasted for 3 days. I decided I had to get a job to make me enough money to buy the things I wanted, for me to succeed in the arts in some way. So to be able to get cameras, to be able to get amplifiers, to be able to get guitars, I needed something that paid a lot of money in a quick period of time. So I actually became a postman. And I worked all the hours under the sun. It was great for working overtime, so I was there most of the time rather than at home. I first, then, if you want to say, officially left home when I was 20. I had everything sort of in place by then, and I'd met a friend who became my first partner, and he said, well, why don't you just move in with me? So I did that, and shortly after I was in New York. So that's how it all came together. It all happened apparently at the same time, along with punk rock. It was about 1975 I realised that in being in Britain there was a vast emptiness. There was a vacuum. You'd gone through the 60s, then you'd had the glam rock period for a while in Britain, but there was nothing really outside of David Bowie or Roxy Music you could equate to that there was any sort of chance of being involved in a real way with it rather than just being a spectator. And so in 1975 I remember making the decision that one day I had hair down to almost my waist, and the next day I had it all cut off, and I started not wearing flares. I started wearing just all black, and it was pretty much like a French existentialist look. There was a film called 400 Blows, which that sort of look affected me, and I thought, no, that's the way I want to be. This is dead. This is the past. I've gone through it. I don't know where the future is going to be, but I do not equate to that anymore, what has been. And then the odd thing was I started noticing other people dressing slightly differently in London. There was one occasion on the tube, I was walking around, there was someone else. He had short hair, he had drain pipe trousers, straight trousers. In those days, in 1975 or 6, it was impossible to get them. And I thought, well, you look odd, you look different. He clocked me as well. He looked at me as we walked by each other. And then you started hearing murmurings of this new thing, this new musical genre or movement, whatever you want to call it. And you started seeing the odd posters for the Sex Pistols concerts, which were, going to attract your attention. It was what we called the gay cowboy poster with the two guys with the Stetsons and their cocks touching. There was one poster for them. We're using that as an advert, and it's bound to catch your eye, and there's something different going on. And I'd met Tony Wakeford by then. We'd met on, of all things, an anti-fascist demonstration, which should amuse some people. And we were the Antifa of the day. But we'd been talking about other things, and I knew he played bass in what was called a pub rock group, and he knew I was learning how to play guitar. And then there was the moment when the Sex Pistols appeared on British television in late 1976, which resulted in the filth and the fury, that phrase that was coined by the British press the next day, and everything changed for me. I thought I'd been waiting for a group like this. This is it. How do I get involved in this? And very soon after, Tony phoned me and said, have you heard of punk rock? I said, yes. Do you want to form a band? Yes. And it started like that. We'd gone up to see The Clash at one of these, it was a two-nighter at a cinema that was run by Pakistanis evidently. And it was a whole the sort of gourmet meal, what was punk rock then. It was supposed to be Susie and the Banshees, the Buzzcocks, The Clash headlining both nights, other less known groups like The Worst, who were one of the best groups I've ever seen. But it was all a setup. We'd gone up to see the group, and the place was just completely closed. So we went to a pub called the Hope and Anchor in North London, just for a place to go and get a drink. And there was a group playing there. I think he was called Huey Lewis, but not the Huey Lewis in the news. It was another guy, sort of more pub rock than punk. It was just one of the people that latched onto the movement, like groups like the Police would a bit later, but I never considered punk. They were sort of not even new wave. They were just guys in the waiting to catch a new wave and come in. And it was that night I saw this guy walking around the audience with a grey Royal Air Force flight jacket on with on the back Phantoms of the Clash, and I thought that looks really like Joe Strummer, and it turned out to be Joe Strummer. I said hello, said if we'd come up to see them, and he said, well, that was never confirmed. It was just these guys trying to get people along to see their, what was, I guess, Bollywood films, and con a load of people in. Once they took a look at us, they closed the place down. They weren't expecting the type of people to turn up. So that, and he was there to see the show as well, and that was the first show. I ended up in exchange for a set of Ernie Ball heavy gauge electric guitar strings, buying Joe Strummer a pint of lager. I think that was the deal. He said, can you buy me something to drink? I'll give you these in exchange. That was the first punk rock thing, whenever that was. Late 76, early 77. All these years on, after 1977, it was a great learning period. I wouldn't like to revisit it at all, and I get a bit sick reading of the sort of this nostalgia that goes on about punk now. But to look back that far when you're 20, 21 years old, and I'm now 48, pushing 49, is a little creepy, I have to say. I don't ever think about it, but it taught me everything of how to survive in the music world. And come 1980, when Crisis split, and the social situation in Britain at that time was odd. I think it's not by chance that groups like Joy Division had come to the fore by then, although they were really beginning to make their name in the previous year in 1979. Most of the early punk concerts took place in gay clubs around London. That's where it really started, especially S&M clubs. Our first manager, Kevin St. John, was basically a gay gangster. We got a contract with him. He was by then the manager of the Roxy. And we got that contract not just because he thought we were a good group that would pull the crowds, but he fancied our lead singer at the time. And he wanted to talk to him alone. We remember that evening when the contract was signed. And of course our suspicions about our manager liking our lead singer were confirmed after our lead singer came out of the office. So everything sort of was along those lines. And one night we turned up early. It was a Sunday night. We caught the train up to Waterloo Station with our equipment, which we walked across the bridge with. We didn't have a van that evening. So it was all part and parcel of this real ethos of just getting by. And looking back on it, it's quite romantic and makes a good story, but we probably didn't like it too much at the time, humping amplifiers and guitars across one of the bridges into which linked Waterloo Station to Covent Garden, where the club was situated. But we got there, knocked on the door, and it interrupted a gay gangster evening. People were dressed in leather trilbies, pink shirts with unfashionably wide collars. Most of them were in their 50s and 60s. It was like a scene from Performance. And we were not welcome. They didn't know how we were going to take it, but we were very cool about everything. However, we were ushered downstairs to where the groups played anyway, and then a guard was sent down who promptly pulled a handgun from inside his jacket and slammed it on the bar and stared at us for the remainder of the evening, whilst the party upstairs came to a close and they emptied out whoever else was in there, whoever we shouldn't see. And the evening was geared up for the show downstairs, but fortunately not everyone left from upstairs, and these two guys came down looking like they were from the London equivalent of The Sopranos, who were in their late 50s, 60s, and took a fancy to the lead singer of the support group, who were then called Raped, and basically jumped on stage, pulled his trousers down and tried to fuck him while the show was going on. It was one of those beautiful moments I think could only happen during those punk days. A punk rock festival at Guildford University in southern England. We were great, the audience were great, we were just meant for that time, and from there on we had a very strong sort of following from the southeast of England, London. It started immediately. If you were there at the first thing, you were doing these things, you got that audience, you got that obsessive fan base. First label was a small independent label that was started by a South London action group. I think it was called Action Group Records, which was really, they'd seen us on a number of demonstrations, mainly right-to-work demonstrations or anti-Nazi League demonstrations, playing off the back of a truck or at halls around the country. And this guy had a cause. He wanted to stop a town hall being knocked down in South London. And he said, well, if you could write a song about this town hall, either being demolished and a new one being put up in its place, I mean, the most horrible sort of subject matter you could possibly get, you can put whatever you want on the B-side. And we used that. Tony wrote this song called No Town Hall, which was actually sort of not bad for considering the subject matter, which in retrospect is highly embarrassing, but it was the way in. It sold thousands. We started to, when it released, to already had a large fan base, and the B-side was really the thing that people bought it for. But in retrospect, the A-side is actually quite a well-written song, and that was the way in. And after a while, when whatever had happened regarding the decision to the building or the destruction of this particular town hall in South London, the guy said that we can have the rights to the single and you can do whatever you want with it. But in the meantime, we'd already gained a session with the BBC by the John Peel Show, the DJ that's recently died. And that was another step up the ladder. The BBC sometime after gave us the opportunity to buy the tapes back, and we decided to issue it on our own label. The road to the BBC started with doing some demo tapes for a small independent company called Step Forward. They got some time for us in the studio where it turned out that the Police were actually doing some of their early records, and not known to the Police, we used their equipment. So I used Andy Summers' guitar on these early demo tapes, and I think Sting's bass was used as well. So perhaps we sounded better than we did at the time by using this much better equipment, because we sent the tapes in that came out of that, and we got the offer to do a John Peel session for the BBC. So you're given a date, you turned up at these massive studios in Maida Vale in North London, and straight away the difference was obvious. They had helpers there to get the equipment out of the van, to help you set up in the studio. The studios were massive. They were keen to make you feel comfortable. It was very, for the first time in our experience of, you know, the oldest of us was 22, the youngest 17 or 18, had been treated like this, that we weren't being treated like an inconvenience, that you were worth something. And that attitude continued throughout the session. We cut the 4 songs, we recorded the first song, the 4 songs that day, and then there was a break called by the studio engineer, the sound engineer who was co-producing the whole thing. And he said, we're going to go and have dinner now in the BBC Works canteen, which was really great. We had great food there. It cost us next to nothing. It was pennies, literally pennies. It was just a nominal amount. And over dinner, he and the 2 sound engineers that were working with us discussed what we wanted and how best to get that out during the next period, which was to mix and produce the songs. And it was such a professional approach. It was a pleasure to be in their company, and how they saw that, in a very old-fashioned, cliched way, that they saw talent in you. They saw something new about you that they wanted to engender, and did their very best to make you feel comfortable and to bring that out. So it was wonderful to be in that sort of environment, as straightforward as the BBC is, or was at least. This is back in 1978. 1, 2. Tony and I, because we'd been both involved in far-left politics to quite a serious degree, wanted to articulate some of that in a new left type of way. The new left were already old as far as we were concerned. And so Crisis was going to be an agitprop type of group. Even more so than, say, The Clash, who were our big heroes more than the Sex Pistols, although in retrospect, the Sex Pistols didn't lose their way, but the Clash did. After they came to America, I have to say. Dirk Bogarde in Covent Garden one day, I think it was the 22nd of September 1986 to be precise, in London. Yeah, that was good. He had a real thing about his eyes. He had special eyes. I always remember that. We connected, and it was the day when he signed copies of his book, Backcloth, for me. And I had the World That Summer had just come out, and I had some promo versions of that with me. And I gave him a signed copy of The World That Summer. And it was the occasion where I asked him to. I went into a shop and bought another copy of Backcloth. I thought, I'm going to get this written to David Tibet, so, you know, from Dirk Bogarde. But he didn't understand me. The noise in Covent Garden was... It was a noisy day. He was saying he hated the crowds, and I said, well, could you write it to Tibet, Dirk Bogarde? But he misheard me and he put T-O-B-E-T-T-E. So it was like to-bet. So David Tibet has this peculiar signed copy of a Dirk Bogarde book, but written to some woman. As Dirk Bogarde said, I don't understand the code you're using, when I tried to explain the situation. And that was good. I appreciated meeting him. I'm less shy now about getting autographs, because I used to meet a lot of people in airports doing such a lot of traveling that I like. So I do have an odd boarding pass. When I flew to Hamburg some years ago, this would be once again the early 90s, I think, I was on the same plane as Ray Davies of the Kinks, and we were queuing up to go through customs, and I got him to sign my boarding pass, and he was very pleasant. I always loved the Kinks. And flying back, I was on the same plane as the rest of the group and his brother, who dislike each other so much they travel separately. So on the same boarding pass, I got Dave Davies to sign his autograph. So I've actually got the Davis brothers on the same thing, which I was quite proud of. Or Ralph Hutter of Kraftwerk. We were in the same restaurant in Sydney Airport a couple of years ago. I'd been in Sydney to actually see Kraftwerk play, and I went over and introduced myself and almost stopped their table, because obviously Death in June meant something to these Germans. And he signed everything I had of Kraftwerk. I had all my CDs in a nice little case I'd been listening to in a hotel room, and I don't know if it was out of fear, but he obligingly wrote everything. And then the rest of the table just spent their time talking in German to each other as I left and went back to my meal at my table, feeling very pleased with myself. They're three people that come to mind, or four people. Oh, there've probably been a few others, but I'm very pleased to know, or to have known, some of the other people I've mentioned. I mean, I think they are in their own right very, very special individuals, and I may not be close to them now, but when I knew them, they certainly were then. I'm very proud to have been part of that whole movement of musicians or artists, or whatever you like to define them as, that came out of that early 80s period in the UK and in America. It wasn't until punk rock came along and you could see that you could make this happen. My interest in music and photography could be channeled in that direction. You didn't have to be a technical wizard musically to be in a group that was successful. It destroyed and deconstructed everything. It was my lifesaver, punk rock was. Fortunately enough, it was because everything was upside down, everything was thrown into a new arena, it was completely accepted. I'd come out already before punk rock to my close friends. And then when punk happened, I was already on the cusp of, as I said, having a partner who was, I was 20, he was 58. And we lived together for 10 years until we came to a natural separation. But he was very accepted at places like the Roxy Club. He used to have good conversations with Captain Sensible. I remember one particular deep one about the death of Mark Armand. Not Mark Armand, Mark Boland. He just died when he'd wrapped his Mini around a tree in England. And we'd gone up to the Roxy for something to do, and the Damned did an impromptu performance there, and he was talking to Jack, my partner then, and it was a very pleasant evening. We'd supported people like the Specials. That was the only concert I ever actually missed because I was ill, but we were always trying to get onto the support slot of the Buzzcocks, but for whatever reason never managed to get on stage because of one riot or another, or just not getting on with the particular promoter who I nearly had a fist fight with at the stage door. So we had an odd reputation. I have to say that if anyone was cursed, Crisis was. It had an extremely violent reputation, which was one of the main reasons, outside of the fact that by 1980 punk rock was well and truly dead, that we decided to split. It wore you down. There was constant fights, not just with other people, because punks in those days were sort of like a target to bull. It was dangerous being a punk rocker in the UK or in Europe in between 77 and 80. There were also internal fights. I can only speak for most of the people that are around me who were disaffected, disenfranchised, working class. And when Johnny Rotten sang No Future, there was no future in the UK in the mid-70s. There really was that feeling of hopelessness that I think in retrospect was a massive catalyst to do something. Because I distinctly remember being worried and living almost in dread about the emptiness that my life would be. But it was, how do you handle this? I mean, Christmas 1974, I contemplated suicide. I was 18 years old and thinking, this is going completely nowhere. I told you I was ill. No, that's just it's been done, I'm afraid. The comedian Spike Milligan's got it on his. I've thought about that, and I still have yet to come up with an answer. I distinctly remember being dragged around in the dirt of Vondel Park, which is where we were sleeping, and feeling the mud and the rain trickle down the back of my neck and thinking it didn't matter any longer because I didn't exist. But after coming out of that 3 days later and finding all my possessions stolen, I just had an empty rucksack and the clothes I was wearing. I didn't even have my passport. I was later deported from Belgium when I tried to, get back to the UK. There's no chance of getting across that channel without having your documents. So I was arrested by the Belgian police and deported. They were life-changing moments. I'm very pleased I went through it. I'd been dropping acid for 2 good years previous to that, since I was 16, and this was the moment to really stop. I probably took it a couple of times after just to make sure I could handle it anymore again, and to control the situation. But it had shown me what I had to do, and I had to embark on the life I really wanted. In 77, there was a 7-inch single put out by Scritti Politti called Skank Block Bologna, which came, the sleeve itself was, once you unfolded the sleeve, it gave you all the necessary information about how to manufacture and distribute your own record, from phone numbers and addresses of pressing plants to how much roughly it would cost and what you had to do. And that was the way in. The guy that started the label that we put our first single out on used that as the basis, and then we did in turn when he gave us, sort of waived his rights on any future pressings of that first single. And then we started doing our own releases. That was invaluable. When you least expect it, something unexpected happens. And it can sort of save your bacon for the moment till you get a clearer picture of the situation. Something came along that did change again, and that was the sort of epiphany I'd had, with LSD. I went to America for the first time in December 1977, pretty much under the invite of Slash magazine, who had seen Crisis's first ever performance. 1977, it was December, flew over on a cheap flight from London to New York with a Greyhound ticket to get to Los Angeles eventually, which took 3 days after a few days here, and stopped in a variety of places. It was good. I mean, I was a punk rocker at the time, so when I'm going into bars in Amarillo, they didn't really know who I was. Bleached hair and black bondage suits, and probably got away with murder, because it turned out there was one guy who got on the bus. It was a black guy who just got out of prison in St. Louis, and he befriended us, or we befriended him, and he told us about how you get coconut oil, and it's like to straighten your hair, and he really got into straightening his hair, and he's talking about stuff like that. And we went into a bar in Amarillo in Texas. Remember, it said on the outside, "A nice place for nice people only," and I didn't realize that was code, because I was with my partner at the time. We walked in, there was like sawdust on the floor. The barmaid was called Mary Lou, and there were guns literally hanging up from behind the bar where you have to leave your gun in holsters. And he disappeared, he was just gone. But I thought, oh well, he probably didn't like the music, which was like bluegrass and country, and I was digging the American experience. But he said to us after that it was like a KKK bar. That was just code for no blacks, a nice place for nice people only. So once we got on the bus again, it was like, oh right. And I was like standing there. I suppose I could have had an interesting time, but I thought I'd probably just stepped off the latest UFO and just leave him alone, So they didn't really know about punk, and that sort of happened after the Sex Pistols tour, which was just about to happen, or was happening at the time. I think after that became in national consciousness, you probably had a harder time of things. When I was going into, say, bars in Tucson, they didn't know what the hell I was. They just stayed clear of the guy with the black bondage uniform on and peroxide hair. I stayed in Los Angeles for most of the time, in Santa Monica, and hung out at the American equivalent on the West Coast of, I suppose, CBGB's here, which was called the Mask, and the equivalent of the Roxy or the Vortex in England, and got to see some of the American punk groups from the West Coast, like the Dickies, the Weirdos, the Screamers, who are the best group I think I ever saw. As I'm sure I might have mentioned before, during that period, they never got around to releasing anything. They were just absolutely brilliant live, and had a really good time because of that, and being invited to parties of film directors and things, because they were the people that seemed to be into Crisis, and finding Elliot Gould with all his clothes on, sitting in the shower, having a shower for some particular peculiar reason. I just thought, I love America. I thought it was really groovy and interesting. And then on the way back, we were crossing one of the bridges. I think it was Manhattan Bridge. It went into the East Port Authority building anyway, the bus, the Greyhound, on exactly New Year's Eve 77. And then trying to keep awake all night long in the terminal, and hearing sort of killers coming down from Times Square talking about how they smashed a broken bottle and put it through a guy's neck out in the square, and they nicked money. And for some reason we were invisible that night. We stayed awake, the police didn't harass us, and no one else did, except some strange old lady that kept talking to us. And none of the menagerie that was New York then, which I found genuinely dangerous and interesting place to be, bothered us. So in the morning, when it got to the time to go and get the flight, because these cheap flights you could only buy the ticket on the day, we jumped on the tube subway system and went out to the place which was called Laker Airlines. Freddie Laker ran the plane. Bought our £50 tickets back to London, and it was the end of an interesting month. I think they don't see the pathos and the ultimate tragedy of that period, which I have a natural equation with, for whatever reason. It's always been there, perhaps because of my background of that immediate post-war period of growing up. I'm unsure myself. I've never pinpointed it. I've just learned to accept it. But it's definitely to do with tristesse, I suppose the French would say, an ultimate sadness and a waste, which is also attractive. Every war has its artistic consequences.
Hold me as I slip away
One of the things that all three original members of Death in June talked about when Death in June was in its formative days, possibly before we even had a name, when we were still rehearsing, back in 1980, that we wanted to be the mirror image of most people's ugliness. I think the shared life experience that Tony Wakeford, Patrick Legas and myself had was that we didn't like very many people, and we were fed up with most people's conceited natures of self-righteousness, especially for Tony and I, coming from a far left background and had seen how the far left had worked in such an unscrupulous and bad way of treating people realistically, that if this is what that is all about, we want nothing to do with it. And perhaps we're going to show them their real mirror image. A lot of people will probably point to But What Ends When the Cymbals Shatter, when that came out as being the first neo-folk, folk industrial album, but I tend to disagree. I think it started with Brown Book back in 87 and the current 93 album, Swastikas Finale. I think they were the two neo-folk, post-industrial folk, or whatever you want to call it. I don't put them in those ghettos. And we didn't do anything deliberately. It was, as I said, completely natural. So whatever people are up to now, I've taken a sidestep out of that. I don't know what people are up to. I know what the originators were up to all those years ago, and I'm still in contact with one or two of those people, such as Boyd Rice, but I don't know and I don't care what's going on. If something is meant for me to listen to, it'll come my way. I get sent a lot of stuff, and I'm pleased that some of the people I've inspired, some of the younger groups, are actually good. I like them. There have been some groups that have inspired me out of that. But I don't foresee anything. I don't spend my time thinking about it. I'm too selfish. I'm too involved with myself and those around me in my world to even possibly imagine wherever anyone else is taking anything. I'm too concerned with where I'm going to take Death in June and its survival to the ultimate end. So musical fashions mean nothing. Tony and I just going back to the very, very beginning, were rehearsing, but we still didn't have a direction until Patrick Legas came along, and during our first rehearsal together, the very first drum beats he did to Heaven Street, I knew that was it. This is going to be a group. We didn't have the name until we were in the studio later, but it dictated itself. All three disparate musical influences that were being put into the one whole came out sounding like that. And as the years went by and Tony left, then Patrick left, I was the sort of sole flag bearer of the situation. I've utilised my own musical taste and what I'm capable of producing myself in whatever way necessary. And until you begin working on a project, you can never tell in which direction it's going to go. I had no idea that The Wall of Sacrifice would be half industrial, half acoustic, and I thought realistically it was going to be my answer to Metal Machine music. So I thought it was going to be completely industrial sounding, but then I wrote some of the sort of acoustic songs I'm best known for on that album, such as Fall Apart or Giddy Carousel. That just came, it declared itself. I remember the last night of mixing in the studio, John Balance from Cole had come along, and David Tibet was there, and they didn't like the presence they felt in the studio. They left. They said, there's something here we can't handle, and they left, and I knew exactly what they meant, but for me it embraces me and I embrace it. So until you start articulating something, it doesn't say how it will be, but it will have that same equation to it if you're intent on keeping it pure to the theme or life force that is Death in June, which is a particular thing in itself. I like anonymity. I appreciate it. I think you can do a lot of work behind the scenes. One of the Japanese warrior codes is Hagakure, which literally translates into hidden behind the leaves, or hidden beneath the leaves. It's camouflage taken to the ultimate. This has been perfect for an artist, although I have to say my siblings haven't been quite so lucky. In terms of a literary piece of work, it would definitely be Jean Genet's Funeral Rites, reading it in the back of the van tour in Italy in exactly 20 years ago, in April 1985, when we were touring Nada. That would be, it was an inspiration. I don't know if it was influential, but certainly an inspiration. Yeah, that's the one that keeps coming back to me. I still feel that people, because of the unique packaging of most Death in June items, that people will still want to possess that piece of art, which is the way I see it. I like the fact that there's a meticulous approach to the releases of Death in June. It's not just good quality music. You're buying into a whole world. That the digipack has got full blocking, it's debossed, it's embossed, it's beautiful to look at, it's beautiful to touch, it's very tactile, it's great to listen to, as far as I'm concerned anyway. And hopefully thousands of other people still feel that. So you might be able to download 10,000 tracks on your iPod, but you still will find people out there that will need to physically possess those things, because that is a reassuring part of physical existence, that they will have those things that they love around them that they can touch, and it's not just some sort of digital set of musical notes in a nice little pocket-sized machinery. I think that is the thing that will keep Death in June hopefully alive, and that I still love. I mean, I still love buying art books. I'm a sucker. You can't take me into bookshops without me coming out with things. And spend a lot of money on stuff. I still want things around me. I still like to touch them. I still like to look at them. Flip through those pages. It needs to be real with me. Computer imagery still doesn't do it for me.
I've got at least 2 ideas for books: the Death in June scrapbook and an official biography. More releases of back catalogue DVDs to maintain that, and in fact recently I've even been approached about reissuing the Crisis material, literally a few weeks ago, by an American company of all places, so that looks like that could happen. There's always the new album in the making, The Concrete Fountain, which is this nebulous thing that's been hanging around my neck since 1997. But you know, it's even on this tour I've come up with some new things. So if it does happen, I lyrically at least it should be very interesting. I hope it's going to be okay. But there's a lot of pressure on to make sure it is a really good album. And to maintain the whole shebang really, which is quite widespread, but I don't know if touring's going to continue too much, because I could give you a real piece of cinema verite right now, but I'm not sure whether or not I would. I would prefer to do that in complete private.
No, it's been interesting. It suits the time as it is now. I think once again, you know, it captures my personal zeitgeist.
This road it leads to heaven. This road it leads to heaven. You didn't deserve it, but I gave it to you. Now you can go. I've had enough of you. Be gone. You did what you were told too quickly. That's what you did. And your only excuse was obeying orders.